Welcome to the episode of Jay Leno's Garage. Today we're going to talk about my 1911 Packard Model 18. The interesting thing about this car and the car right next to it, that one, the Model 38, we did a few years ago. Both of them come from the same family. And the cool thing is I can trace the lineage all the way back to the original owners, which is kind of cool. This car was modified sometime, I think, in the middle 30s or early 40s. It was originally a landaulet style body, and then it was converted to this, so I've kept it this style body. It's called the Model 18 because it has 18 horsepower, which is really 30 horsepower. The 18 comes from the French version of how they derive horsepower, but in American terms, it's actually a 30 horsepower. It's a four-cylinder, 326 cubic inch 4, so it's almost a 327 Chevy, except it's four cylinders with big pistons. You'll see those in a second. As you can see, it's a classic roadster body. The gas tank is right here under the seat. That's the storage compartment there. We made that because it was just something we added when we put the car together. But other than that, it's pretty much original gas headlights. Let's take a look at the engine. Let's show you what we got here. Really pretty motor, T-head, four-cylinder. There's your magneto right there. These are your priming cups. In cold weather, you'd put a little gas in there, open it, that would allow the gas to go into the cylinder, close it up again, and then she'd fire right up. A number of years ago, I had a guy on the Tonight Show named Victor Christian. He was 106 years old. And he was the world's oldest car salesman. He worked at Acadia Ford. Early 90s, I had him on the Tonight Show. To impress him, I drove my 32 Packard to the show, and I brought him out, and I said, hey, what do you think of my 32 Packard? And he said to me, it's okay, but you know, after 15, they were nothing but crap. He didn't use the word crap, he used another word, but let's just assume it was crap. And I said, why is that? They were crap after 15. I never quite got what he meant by that, until I got this car and that 1913 there. These drive and shift so nicely, you know. All the gears are hand lapped in. It just has a mechanicalness that is missing in later cars. There's a hand-built quality to these cars that later mass-produced cars just didn't have. Although this car looks fairly simple, almost looks like a Model T, it's much more sophisticated. It has a transaxle, which means the transmission is, rather than right here, for better weight distribution and handling, it's back here under the rear end. 3-speed transmission. As I said, four-cylinder engine. I'll show you the transaxle in a minute. We'll get under the car and take a look. But you know, the fun thing about these cars sometimes is all the minutiae you get with the car, the automobilia, the paraphernalia, whatever you want to call it. Come on, let me show you some of the documentation I got with this car. Take a look. When dealing with old car stuff, oftentimes you have to put on your old guy glasses, which kind of help. Here are some original pictures of the car. Here it is in a parade. I think this is 1938. There's the original owner of the car right there, kind of having some fun. There's a chauffeur. There's the car again. Here's another picture of the car here. That's how it was modified in the late 30s or early 40s. Here's a letter from the original owner. This guy sold the car in 1950. He had no place to store it. It was his dad, so he sold it in 1950. Here it is in the 40s. As you see, kind of painted up. They had to pretty much did them in gaudy colors back in those days. There's the other car, the Model 38. That's what it looked like when I got it. Here's a letter from 1963. I've considered your offer of $5,000 for my Packard. I've decided not to sell it. Should be worth at least $8,000. That was pretty high back in '68. Oh, here's a bigger picture of the one we looked at before. Interesting thing is when you bought a Packard, the instruction book, it's not like today. They told you everything. This, I think, is the original body style that my car had. As you can see, the whole car, when you bought the car, they told you how to do everything. Here's some early pictures here. There's the car there. There's the engine. I guess this car has been restored a couple of times over the years. And here's an original book. This is the stuff that's really hard to find. It's in pretty nice shape. You know, these cars were very expensive cars. This car was $4,500 in 1911. And I'm told the blocks were all cast in France because they had the best casting methods at the time. And then they were kept outside for 2 years to let the block age a bit. That's the tool kit. Back then you're expected to work on your car. But when you're restoring the car, this kind of stuff is invaluable. I mean, it's just amazing. Shows you how the clutch engages. There's your engine right there. Details of general construction. Your electrical system, clutch, oiling clutch and other parts. Let's go back to the car and take a look. As you can see, it's pretty much a sealed engine compartment. Dirt can't blow up from the street and get into the carburetor or into the engine. You know, Packards were such quality automobiles. This was so you could test your spark to see if your mag was working. See how that works like that? You just sort of, you can test in the spark jumps, well then you got spark. That's how that works. You'll notice the water pump is red, steering gear is red. That's not us trying to make it look colorful. That's the way it was actually done back in the day. You know, a motor was a pretty amazing thing to people, and they wanted to make it look as pretty and mechanical as possible. You know, people would open the hood and ooh and ah. People don't really do that anymore. They don't marvel at an engine running anymore because we all take it for granted. So now you open the hood and there's a big piece of plastic there. But these early engines, a lot of copper, a lot of brass, a lot of polished aluminum, real quality metals. What we've done to this car is add an electric starter. That's the only modern convenience we've done, because if you've ever tried to crank over 326 cubic inches, it's a lot. So the electric starter helps out a little bit. When you bought your Packard, this is what you got. You got your tool kit right here. That's kind of cool. Everything is nicely laid out there for you. As I mentioned before, we put in an electric starter, as you can see. It's a gear reduction starter. Had to make a ring gear here so we could run that. That's your flywheel. Look how heavy that flywheel is. This thing just lumps along. But as you can see, it's pretty straightforward. There's your clutch. These are your oilers. You'll see those work in a minute. This is your oiler as well. We have to turn that on before we drive the car. This, of course, is your ignition. You start it on battery, and then you switch over to magneto. But that's pretty much your, here's your exhaust pipe here. Your muffler's there. And believe me, electric starter, this thing is 326 cubic inches is a lot to kick over, especially on a cold day. So it just, it's a little bit of a cheat, but just makes the car more manageable, especially if you stall it or something in traffic. You can just hit the button and go again. So let's put the floor back in. Let's take a look under the car. I'll show you that transax I was talking about. Come on. Well, here we are under the car. Here's your drive shaft. There's your leather boot to keep the grease in. And there's your transaxle. That's your transmission back there for better weight distribution. There's your muffler right here. Notice you only have brakes on the rear wheel only, and they are mechanical brakes. There was no hydraulic brakes until, oh, I guess the early 20s. Duesenberg was the first American car to have hydraulic brakes, of course. And that's pretty much it. It's a pretty simple car, and I think we're about ready to go for a ride. Now you notice these cars don't have an ignition. You just have a switch that turns it on and off. So what did you do back in the day when you parked your car? How did you lock it? Well, you got one of these. It looks like the Denver boot, you know. This has got a key in it. You open it up, you put this around the tire, and you lock it. And that's how you keep your car from being stolen. A guy named Alan McSweeney gave me this. He collects a whole bunch of these. He's got quite a set of them. There's all different makes and models, but these were quite popular in the early teens and 20s and before that, you know, when cars didn't have ignition locks. But you just lock that on the wheel, and if you're really paranoid, you put one on all four wheels. First thing we want to do is turn on our ignition to coil so it starts on the battery. Let's try and start it without the electric starter. Let's retard the ignition, give it a little bit of gas. Turn on our oilers. What this does is drips feed oil into the engine. Let's see if she starts. This bar makes it really convenient. Here's your choke lever here. What a sweet running engine this is. Let's take a look at it running. Here I am checking the spark, see? They're all firing. Now you don't have to do that each time. I just do it to make sure everything's running nicely. Just so smooth. Top speed on this car is about 60 miles an hour. Go for a ride. I know 30 horsepower doesn't sound like much, but this thing is a torque monster. It just pulls so nicely and it's so smooth. Don't forget, when this thing was built, the speed limit was about 12 or 15 miles an hour, something crazy like that. Then in the 20s, it went to 45 miles an hour. I mean, I really understand what my old friend Victor Christian talked about when he said these early cars just had a mechanicalness to them. It shifts so nicely, this transaxle. You know, these big giant gears that just go like this. This is what really put the steam cars out of business, because these things, once the electric starter came in, these things were pretty bulletproof. Just press the button and you go. Starting to warm up now. This thing never overheats. This is such a precision automobile. You know, I read where when they bored these blocks, the piston had to fit in the bore without the engine ring on it, without the piston rings on it, and be tight enough not to fall through. You could pull it through, but it couldn't fall through on its own. So that's how good the clearances were. The piston fit in the bore snugly without the piston ring. I mean, that was the measure of putting it together. You know, these things are just dead on reliable. It's a warm day here in California, and I can't get the temperature to go out of the normal range. In fact, when they road tested these, in the summertime, they would drive them from Detroit to New York City or Chicago without the fans connected, just to see if the radiator was good enough to cool, you know, just driving along. Let's take a look. Here are your oilers. See how those drip oil down into the engine, the cam bearings and whatnot? This is your main engine oiler here. Just fill that up with oil and drive it until it goes down. Here's your advance and retard. This is a hand throttle or a cruise control. And standard clutch, gas pedal in the middle, brake. 3-speed sequential gearbox. And of course your handbrake. Here's your motometer up there. You see the red line? That's our water temperature. The Selden patent, that was, he was an attorney who patented the idea for the automobile. Henry Ford became an American folk hero when he took him to court and beat it because he didn't want to pay the Selden patent, because Selden never really ever built a car. You know, it's hard to convey to you on film what a nice car this is to drive, how everything just clicks in, how the steering's very direct. You know, the amazing thing is engineers have always been engineers, and they always built the best engineered product they could at the time. And this is a classic example of that. You know, when you're driving a new McLaren, you realize what modern engineers can do with computers and electronics. And when you look at old engineers from, this car is over 100 years old, and I'm driving it around Los Angeles like a modern car. It more than keeps up with traffic, with the exception of the freeway. I mean, you can use this. I use this to go to work, and it's a lot of fun. It's reliable. It's pretty bulletproof. It's a real quality automobile. You know, Packard had the greatest slogan, a little sexist, but it was, ask the man who owns one. Just shifts so nicely, drives so nicely. You know, there's a real sense of mechanicalness. I've said that before with this car. You just really feel like you're driving the car. I mean, it's a real engineer's automobile built by the best engineers America had at the time. And it's a piece of history, and I hope you enjoyed this little trip down memory lane. In the McLarens and the supercars, those are all a lot of fun, but sometimes it's fun to go back to basics and see what it was like. When this car was built, the average American had never ridden in an automobile. So this was like a revelation. Most people have never gone more than, well, how fast can a horse run? 25 miles an hour, maybe, something like that? I don't know. But to go a mile a minute, that was pretty crazy. And this was the best of the breed, the Packard. We'll see you guys next week.